So this is extract 31 of Terry Pratchett's Truckers. From the Book of Gnomes, Exits, chapters 4, verses 15 to 16. It had been a quarry. The gnomes knew this because the gate had a rusty sign on it saying, "Quarry, dangerous, do not enter." They found it after a mad, panicking run across the fields. By luck, if you listen to Angelo, because of Arnold Brothers' established 1905, if you believed Gerda. It doesn't matter how they settled in, found the few old tumble-down buildings, explored the caves and rock heaps, cleared out the rats. That wasn't too difficult. The harder part was persuading most of the older gnomes to go outside. They felt happier with a floor over their heads. Granny Morky came in useful there. She made them watch her walk up and down outside, braving the terrible first air. Besides, the food taken from the store didn't last forever. There was hunger, and there were rabbits in the fields above, vegetables too. Not nice and clean, of course, as Arnold Brothers, established 1905, had intended they should be, but just sticking in the ground, covered with dirt. There were complaints about this. The molehills that appeared in a nearby field were simply the result of the first experimental potato mine. After a couple of nasty experiences, foxes learned to keep away. And then there was Dorcas's discovery of electricity still in wires leading to a box in one of the deserted sheds. Getting at it while staying alive seemed to need nearly as much planning as the Great Drive, with a lot of broom handles and rubber gloves involved. After a lot of thought, Masklin had pushed the thing near one of the electrical wires. It had flashed a few lights, but had kept silent. It felt as if it was listening. He could hear it listening. He'd taken it away again and tucked it into the gap in one of the walls. He had an obscure feeling that it wasn't time to use the thing yet. The longer they left it, he thought, the longer they'd have to work out things for themselves. He'd like to wake it up later and say, "Look, this is what we've done, all by ourselves." Gerda had probably worked out that they were probably somewhere in China. And so the winter became spring, and spring became summer. But it wasn't finished, Masklin felt. He sat on the rocks above the quarry on guard. They always kept a guard on duty, just in case. One of Dorcas's inventions, a switch which was connected to a wire which would light a bulb down under one of the sheds, was hidden under a stone by his side. He'd been promised radio one of these days. One of these days might be quite soon, because Dorcas had pupils now. They seemed to spend a lot of time in one of the old tumble-down sheds, surrounded by bits of wire and looking very serious. Guard duty was quite popular, at least on sunny days. This was home now. The gnomes were settling in, filling in the corners, planning, spreading out, starting to belong. Especially Bobo. He disappeared on the first day and turned up again scruffy and proud as the leader of the quarry rats and father of a lot of little ratlings. Perhaps it was because of this that the rats and the gnomes seemed to be getting along okay, politely avoiding each other whenever possible, and not really eating one another. They belong here more than we do, thought Masklin. This isn't really our place. This belongs to humans. They've just forgotten about it for a while, and one day they'll eventually remember it. They'll come back here, and we'll have to move on. We'll always have to move on. We'll always have to try and create our own little worlds inside the great big world. We used to have it all, and now we think we're lucky to have a little bit. He looked down at the quarry below him. He could just make out Grimmer sitting in the sun with some of the young gnomes, teaching them to read. That was a good thing anyway. He'd never be that good at it, but the kids seemed to pick it up easily enough. But there were still problems. The departmental families, for example. They had no departments to rule now and spent a lot of time squabbling about it. There seemed to be arguments going on the whole time, and everyone expected him to sort it out. It seemed the only times gnomes actually acted together was when they had something to occupy their minds. Beyond the moon, the thing had said, you used to live in the stars. Masklin sat back and listened to the bees. One day we'll go back. We'll find a way to get to the big ship in the sky, and we'll go back. But not yet. It'll take some doing. And the hard part again will be getting people to understand. Every time we climb up a step, we settle down and think we got to the top of the stairs. and then we start bickering about things. Still, even knowing that the stairs are there is a pretty good start. From here, he could see for miles across the countryside. For instance, he could see the airport. It had been quite frightening the day they'd first seen a jet go over, but if a few of the gnomes had recalled pictures from books that they'd read, and it turned out to be nothing more than a sort of lorry built to drive in the sky. Masklin hadn't told anyone why he thought that knowing more about the airport would be a good idea. Some of the others suspected, he knew, but there was so much to do that they weren't really thinking about it right now. He'd led up to it carefully. He just said that it was important to find out as much as he could about this new world, just in case. He put it in such a way that no one had said, in case of what? And anyway, there are people to spare, and the weather was good. He'd led a team of gnomes across the field to the airport. It had been a week's journey, but there were 30 of them, and there'd been no problems. They'd even had to cross a motorway, but they'd found a tunnel built for badgers, and a badger coming along it the other way turned round and hurried off when they approached. Bad news like armed gnomes spreads quickly. And then they found the wire fence and climbed up it a little way and spent hours watching the planes landing and taking off. Masklin felt, just he had done once or twice before, that there was something very important they still had to do. The jets looked big and terrible, but once he thought that about lorries. You just had to know about them. Once you had the name, you had something you could handle, like a sort of lever. One day, they could be useful. One day, the gnomes might need them to take another step. Funnily enough, he felt quite optimistic about it. He'd had one glorious moment of feeling that, although they argued and bickered and got things wrong and tripped over themselves, gnomes would come through in the end. Because Dorcas had been watching the planes too, clinging to the wire with a calculating look in his eyes. And Masklin had said, just supposing, for the sake of argument, you understand, that we needed to steal one of those. Do you think it could be done? And Dorcas had rubbed his chin thankfully and thoughtfully. Shouldn't be too hard to drive, he said, and then he grinned. They've only got 3 wheels. And that is the end of Terry Pratchett's Truckers.